Welcome to American History Live's new podcast. Every other week, I, Abigail Adams, will discuss American Revolutionary history and the foundations of our great nation. Today, I am here with Benjamin Franklin to discuss the catalyst for the Boston Tea Party, the Tea Act of 1773.
Hello, Miss Adams. Thank you for having me with you today. I'm eager to discuss the Tea Act, which was yet another encroachment on colonial trade and business. It was an act of blatant political favoritism that attempted to give the British East India Company a monopoly in the American colonies.
Very true. This act, which Parliament thought would be accepted by the colonies because it was intended to lead to lower prices on tea, was just an example of control and an attack on free markets. The Parliament underestimated our resolve to have a say in our own destiny and our belief in trade and fairness.
Absolutely, Miss Adams. Now, the origins of the Tea Act can be traced back to 1767 with something called the Townshend Revenue Act. Parliament, in need of funds due to the continuous wars and mismanagement of them, chose to look to the colonies to fix their monetary woes. The Revenue Act did not tax tea alone, though. It included taxes on other things like glass, oil, paint, lead, and paper. Taxes are, of course, necessary for a government to function, but these taxes were for the colonies only, and we had no representation in Parliament.
No taxation without representation.
Hear, hear!
We organized boycotts of British goods in response to the Townshend Acts, and that worked. Taxes were repealed on everything except tea in 1770. However, tea had unique restrictions even prior to the Townshend Acts. Tea companies, including the British East India Company, were required to sell tea exclusively at tea auctions in London. This created an additional fee for all tea coming to the colonies, as the tea first had to be auctioned in London and then shipped to the Americas. Tea companies paid a tax per pound on tea sold. American merchants purchased tea in London and shipped it back to the colonies. But the British East India Company specifically was in trouble.
The British Parliament was so concerned about the company, particularly its role in India, so it passed the Tea Act of 1773 to help save the British East India Company. And under the leadership of Lord North, Parliament passed the act giving the British East India Company an exclusive license to export tea directly to the American colonies. And now there was no need to go through the London auction. The company had 17 million pounds of surplus tea, which could be sold in the colonies without the tea tax.
This was supposed to be a win-win for Parliament. The British East India Company would be able to survive by selling their tea at a lower cost directly to the colonies. Parliament would assert its right to tax and control trade in the colonies. And they thought colonists would be happy as their cost would dramatically decline for tea. But that is not quite what happened, Mr. Franklin.
No, we all hope, but it wasn't. Parliament was attempting to give the British East India Company a monopoly on tea, an affront to economic liberty. This move would harm American merchants, who could not compete with the undercut prices. Even smuggled tea would be higher. Additionally, should one company be favored by the government? American colonists recognized the act for what it was: political patronage and corruption, along with an attempt to manipulate colonists into accepting further government control from England.
In response, we refused to allow ships to unload their tea cargo, or we allowed cargo to rot at the ports.
And in late 1773, the Beaver, Dartmouth, and Eleanor arrived at the Boston harbor with tea from the British East India Company. And I believe your husband's cousin and his organization had something to say about that.
Absolutely. Samuel Adams, along with his fellow Sons of Liberty, were determined to send those ships back to England, refusing to allow the cargo to be removed from the ships. But the Lieutenant Governor of Massachusetts, Thomas Hutchinson, refused to send the ships back. As a result, on December 16th, 1773, members of the Sons of Liberty, dressed as Mohawk Indians, boarded the ships, dumping 340 chests of tea into the harbor.
Ah, and this is the infamous Boston Tea Party. Parliament would not let the Tea Party go unanswered. And with this act of defiance, the colonists and British governments continued their collision course towards American independence. Yes.
The Tea Act, along with other actions of Parliament, led to many colonists to believe that separation was the only course of action.